Praise the Lord. I said, praise the Lord. Please celebrate Michael Pounds also. He's also another great artist from the UK, Michael Pounds. Do we really have a minute? So it starts like this. There's a song he sang earlier on that I love. He says, we'll lift to your name. We'll lift to your name. We'll lift 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 your name. So, why does that song mean a lot to me? So, 1st of April 2010, we had morning devotion. Just stay. We had morning devotion, my wife and I at home. And morning devotion ended up like a quarrel because we were due to receive our phones. We're due upgrade, and we were to receive a BlackBerry Bold and a BlackBerry Curve. And I remember ending that morning devotion and telling my wife, you will get the Curve and I'll get the Bold. And my wife said, why? I said, because I'm the head of the house. And she said, what about preferring me first? I said, this is final. I'm the head of the house. I'll get the Bold, you will get the Curve. So morning devotion that was supposed to have ended in a sweet way ended up in, somehow. Anyway, I didn't pay attention to her. I went out to car phone warehouse to pick up the phones. And on this particular day, I felt like a really good Christian. And everybody was shunting. And that's not typical what you see in the UK. People just kept on going in front of me. And I just felt, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, somebody else will come. Like, yeah, it's fine. And then that happened for a while. And then eventually I picked up my phones. And I went home. And by the time I got home, I saw the ambulance and the police in front of my house. They were trying to break into my house. And I didn't know what was going on. And I said, what's going on? And they said somebody had called that somebody was in danger in my house. Now, my wife was working in Preston then, and typically she would come back on a Thursday. Now, remember, this is April 1. But I was supposed to go to Liverpool for something on Thursday, and I begged her to come back on Wednesday so that I could travel on Thursday. Eventually, that morning, I canceled the trip. I didn't go again. And so I walked into the house. I opened the door for the cops and everybody. They walked into the house. We walked up the way to my room. And that was my wife lying down on the floor. Her eyes were open, but she was saying nothing. And so we lifted her up from the floor, put her up on the bed, and she just sat down like that, just looking. And I said, baby, talk to me. And she just wasn't saying anything. So they started running tests on my wife and couldn't find anything wrong with her. So they said, maybe she's taking drugs. So they started searching my house and searching my drug cabinets and all that. Maybe we've got cocaine or something. And they couldn't find anything. All this while, I didn't think there was anything. I just thought she was being grumpy for the phones and didn't want to talk to me. So I was like, well, when you're tired, we will talk. And then it dawned on me all of a sudden that it was actually serious. And then all of a sudden the ambulance people are strapping her in and all that and saying we have to go to the hospital. So I'm like, what's going on? So I start calling people. I first called my mom and told her, I said, your daughter is not saying anything. So my mom prayed and called my pastor's wife then and said, your daughter is not saying anything. And they prayed. So I thought, let me quickly call some of my friends. And I started calling all my friends. And everybody said, don't mind Aaron T. Aaron. He's doing April Fool. And so this was just me alone with my wife in the hospital in Welling Garden City. And I remember getting into Welling Garden City. And I just kept on speaking in tongues and speaking in tongues. The song is playing. That's the inspiration behind the song. And I just kept on speaking in tongues. And they told me they were going to kick me out of the hospital. That if I keep speaking in tongues, that I'll be distracting other patients. And I said to them, I will go ahead and do what I'm doing because it's this that would save my wife. Eventually, they got security and they kicked me out. I kept on speaking in tongues outside. I still didn't think there was anything major. I just thought this would end, being a man of faith. Eventually, all this was about 12 noon. Eventually, I'm going to miss out a lot of parts. So eventually at 8 p.m., because of time, 8 p.m., they decided to run a scan. And they found out that my wife had been bleeding in the brain all this while. And they had not known, so she was just flowing with the blood. So all of a sudden, they started acting really quickly. They put her on life support. And they said they had to move her from that hospital immediately. So they started looking for hospitals in London and couldn't find any hospital. Eventually, around 10 p.m., they found a hospital, the Royal Free Hospital, that had a bed. And they said we had to move immediately. They tried to get a plane. There was no plane. So they had to take her by bus to Royal Free. No friends, all my pastor friends, everybody I called still thought I was doing April Fool. Eventually, we got to London at 12 midnight. And I remember walking into the hospital. And the surgeon looked at me. I'm missing out a lot of parts. The next time I come, I'll bring my CDs. You'll hear it in her voice. And I remember getting to the hospital, and the doctor looked at me and said, "Are you Mr. Aaron?" I said, "Yes, I'm Mr. Aaron." And he said, "Listen, I've seen the scans, I've seen the pictures. Your wife, Annabelle, will die imminently." I said, "Sir, you do what you know how to do. We will do what we know how to do." So that's why I sang that song. So I stepped out into the yard and I sang, "We'll lift your name higher. We'll lift your name higher." So by this time, my friends definitely knew this can't be April Fool. It must be serious. So people started calling, "Where am I?" People had picked it up. People were praying in Ghana. Premier was praying. People were praying. And then my friends came to the hospital. And then my friends were praying. Obviously, I couldn't even talk to anybody. I was just praying. Worshiping. I couldn't pray. Eventually, at 2:30, the surgeon came out and said to me, in his words earlier on, he said, 2:30, he came out and said, "The operation has been successful, but your wife is not out of the woods yet. She would have a stroke." She will have a stroke. She would be disabled for life. Said all kind of stuff. And I said, well, if God has done it, then God has done it. So I told my friends, let's go. So I went home that morning. I got home and I went into my scriptures and I started remembering everything God has told me about my wife. And I put everything on an A4 sheet of paper. And I titled it Annabelle's Confession. And I wrote everything in full paper. I said, called my prayer partner, Pastor Lalo. I said, we're going to the hospital at 7 a.m. And I remember walking into the hospital in intensive care unit at 7:30. And I saw my wife and couldn't recognize her. She had life support. She had all kind of things, bandages, everything all around her head. And for the first time, I became so scared and fearful. And just couldn't, all the boldness I had as a sharp, strong man of God disappeared straight away. So I think I was in tears. And I held her hands and I started singing that song that says, "You are the pillar that holds my life. Oh, you are the pillar that holds my life. Master Jesus, you are the pillar that holds my life. Master Jesus, you are the pillar that holds my life." So because of time, I kept on singing it, and all of a sudden I felt someone tap me from behind, and it was the nurse. And I said, "Hi." And she said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because whatever you were doing, your wife started moving." She said, "She has not moved all morning, but the moment she started singing, she started moving." So I started singing, "You are the pillar that holds her life." And the more I kept on singing it, my wife became very violent. And she opened an eye and looked at me and acknowledged me and just said she hadn't moved all night. And she became really violent. So I just kept on singing, crying, but singing. I couldn't pray. I couldn't use the confession. I just did what I know how to do. So when you see me worship, it comes from somewhere. And for people who ask, so it's Aaron T. Aaron. And the T in my name simply means Tochukwu. In Nigeria, it means praise God. So for this reason, I was born. So I'm unapologetic about my worship. And I would do it anywhere. So I just continued in the hospital. I didn't care who was there. And I just kept on saying, "You are the pillar that holds her life." And she just kept on trying to get everything out. And then eventually she was going to get the life support off, but there was something that was hooked to her tongue. And I was afraid that she was going to pull her tongue out. So I said, why is she acting this way? Because I didn't understand. And they said, look, she's trying to take the life support off. And they said, listen, she is not breathing. They showed me the life support. They said, we're helping her to breathe. If she takes this off, she would die. But I couldn't stand and watch her be violent. So I said, you know what? Take it off. And they said, no, we can't do that. I said, can you call a doctor, please? They called the doctor. The doctor explained. I said, take it off. And they took it off. Till now, my wife has not needed life support.
Praise God.
So that started. So that encouraged my heart. They said she was going to be in intensive care unit for 6 weeks. I'm cutting out a lot of parts because I'm watching time. I was supposed to do 1 minute. So anyway, I cut out. So by 12 o'clock, she had been moved from intensive care unit to the ward. And as far as I was concerned, my wife was healed. But that's where the real battle started. Because all of a sudden, she couldn't remember my birth date. She didn't remember when we got married. She had completely lost her memory. And every day I'll go and see my wife. If I leave the room now, she won't remember that I've been here. She will see me and be excited about seeing me. And the doctors kept on telling me that that's what she's going to be for the rest of her life. I couldn't understand it. I mean, if God has healed her from whatever he healed her from, it can't now be this memory thing. And this continued for days, and they would give her information in the morning, and they would say she's not retaining information. I will get back. My wife is from Ghana, by the way, so I'll get in there and I'll say, where are we? She'll say, are we in Ghana? So she completely lost it. And so on one day I was really angry, and the doctors kept on telling me that I need to embrace the fact that my wife would never have her memory again. And I said, how dare you say such a thing? Let's go and see my wife. And I went into the room with the doctor and I said, baby, who am I? And my wife said, my husband. I said, that's all you need to know. If you know who your husband is, you're coming out of this place. That was April. Eventually, I think it was bank holiday in August, so my wife has been in hospital all this while. And I got sick out of physiotherapy day in, day out. 2 over 10 every evening. 2 over 10, 2 over 10. And I told them, you know what, can I take my wife home for the bank holiday? I'm cutting out a lot of stuff. My wife used to literally wake up and help the nurses clean the hospital. Somebody who was sick in intensive care unit. It took 45 days to lick out the bleed from her brain that had bled in 12 hours. So she used to walk around with a drip and blood just leaking out. It took 45 days just to lick that out. And she would carry that around and help them clean. So even the nurses could not understand. This person is supposed to be sick. They would give her painkillers. And they would ask her, do you feel any pain? She would ask them, am I supposed to be feeling something? They just couldn't understand it. She wasn't feeling any pain, nothing. And she was so restless that she would find something to do in the hospital. And when my friends come, I'll make her pray with everybody. And she will say, Father, I don't know what is going on, but I trust that you will get all the glory. And that's all she would say. So the hospital, obviously being who I am, I have too many friends. The hospital said I could only have 2 friends at a time. So I told all my friends in the world to come. So when you come to the hospital, I'll move them in 2 by 2 and I'll give them the confessions. I'll say, you say on, you pray, you leave. Next 2, come in. And that's what I was doing all through. You don't come here to cry. You just come, you say the confessions, and you go. And that's what we're doing round the clock. Anyway, eventually, bank holiday, they decided that they would allow me. After much persuasion, they decided they would allow my wife come home. And I took my wife home. And on the way home, I went past the street to my house. And my wife said, that's the way to the house. I said, are you sure? She said, yes. I said, okay, lead us home. And she led us home. So before we left the hospital, I was warned she can never drive again. She should never cook because she could burn the house. And they told me all these things. Anyway, when we got home, I said, baby, drive. Now, before you shoot me, I would explain. My wife is one of the only people I know who drives an automatic with 2 legs. I don't know how she does it. She drives automatic with her 2 feet. I've tried it many times. It just can't work. So I wanted to check if she still had her balance. And she got into the car and she drove normally. I said, what's wrong with all these people? So as soon as we got into the house, I said, baby, cook. And I sat down somewhere in the lounge where I could watch her. And she cooked like normal and fed us. So I said, all right, I don't know what they're saying in the hospital. I said, so I got her to rest that weekend. I took her back to the hospital on Tuesday morning, and they scored my wife 8/10. So I said, it's obvious the hospital is not helping. It's simple. She's been here for how many months? 2/10 every day. She came home for a weekend. Who is the better doctor? Can I have my wife back home? And we went back and forth, and my wife was released home. Another round of battle. We would try and read the Bible, and my wife would not be able to read. She wouldn't see anything. But anyway, just cut all the long story short. My wife was doing an MBA when this happened. My wife has completed her MBA. They said she would never ever get on a plane again. My wife went to South Africa by herself, came back, went to China by herself, came back, flies around by herself and comes back. They told us not to attempt to have children because it could trigger whatever that happened. So while she was still going through treatment in 2014, we decided to have an appointment with the hospital because she had a treatment she was going to have in March, and my baby was coming in January. So I wanted to know if there will be any repercussions because of breastfeeding and all that. And the doctor was wondering, said to us, why would you be thinking about breastfeeding? You can't be having a child. I said, my wife is due in January. He could not even think that my wife was pregnant. He said, you are joking. She can't be pregnant. I said, deal with it. The baby is coming in January. And my baby came out very healthy. No problem with mother. No problem with child. If I continue, I could go on all night. But this is to encourage anybody here that there is nothing God can do. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I've seen her get better every day. I've seen her get better. She finished her MBA. She went back to work as a consultant. You know, it's been a painful journey, but this God is too good, oh. For 1 minute. This God is too good, oh. Oh, this God is too good, oh. This God is too good, oh.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. What a testimony. What a testimony. What a God.